Hi, folks, and welcome to the Meaningful Money Podcast, session number 335. This is the podcast dedicated to helping you put your finances in order. My name is Pete Matthew, and I'm going to share with you everything you need to know and everything you need to do to secure your financial future. I'm here to help you make sense of money. Here we go once again, session number 335. That's a big number, isn't it? Sometimes I can't quite believe it, but it's great to have you with me once again. Thank you for joining me. And I'm excited for this one because today's guests are giants in the FIRE community. Financial Independence, Retire Early. Their podcast and their blog is massive, and deservedly so, because these guys communicate a clear passion for their subject, and most importantly, in doing so, they inspire others to follow them on their journey and inspire others to take their own journey towards financial independence. Today, I'm speaking with Brad Barrett and Jonathan Mendonsa from ChooseFI.com. Super excited to bring you this one. So we'll get to that in just a minute. After the interview, of course, I'll read out a review that's been left recently, discuss what we're going to be talking about next time, all that good stuff. But before any of that, remember, this podcast continues to be brought to you with the help of my good friends at 7 Investment Management. They've been helping me out here, supporting me with equipment and all that sort of stuff. It takes quite a bit to run this shop these days, so they've been helping me out since 2011, which is amazing. Really grateful to them for continuing to do so. So please do check out what they're up to, 7im.co.uk. It's the number 7im.co.uk. Also, for investing, check out the Meaningful Money branded self-investment platform that 7im have built. meaningfulmoney.tv/podcastinvest. All the information you need to know is there. Okay? meaningfulmoney.tv/podcastinvest. Right. The guys at ChooseFI, they're more sort of guests by popular demand, if you like. So many of you that listen to me are also fans of Jonathan and Brad at ChooseFI. And as the FI movement gathers pace here in the UK, I wanted to see what they had to say. As many of you know, a few weeks ago, I had an amazing conversation with one of the UK leading lights in the FIRE community, Barney Whiter, aka the Escape Artist. And I wanted to chat to the ChooseFI guys as well. Maybe one day I'll chat to Mr. Money Mustache. I wonder if he'll come on. But, Brad and Jonathan really are leading lights in the US FI scene, so I know you're going to enjoy this conversation. So, notes, links, all the good stuff. The only link you need to remember today is the show notes, meaningfulmoney.tv/session 335. Also going to put in a special one for them just in case it's easier for you, meaningfulmoney.tv/ChooseFI. Okay, so a special one for these guys, meaningfulmoney.tv/ChooseFI or /session 335, whatever floats your boat, whichever one is easy for you to remember. Here's my conversation with Brad and Jonathan. Well, this is exciting. Today, I'm privileged to welcome Brad Barrett and Jonathan Mendonsa from the machine that is the ChooseFI podcast, and there's just so much more to it than that. So, guys, welcome to Meaningful Money. How you doing?
So good. Thank you so much for having us, Pete.
Yeah, doing very well. Should be fun.
So, where are you speaking to us from?
Richmond, Virginia, other side of the pond.
Mm-hmm. Nice part of the world. So, can you, one at a time, please, just introduce yourselves? This is just like who you are, what it is you're doing right now, but a little bit about how you got to this point, just for context for folks.
Yeah, Brad, tee us up.
All right. So, yeah, I'm Brad. I actually just turned 40. I live in Richmond, VA, here with my wife and 2 daughters. I am a former accountant, so I was a CPA here for basically my entire adult life. I guess I left about 5 years ago after basically pursuing financial independence for what is, in the grand scheme of things, a fairly short time, about 13 or 14 years, and started some internet sites. And that's actually how Jonathan and I met. And I'm sure we'll get into that in a little bit. But basically, the pursuit of financial independence and the pursuit of entrepreneurship helped me get to a point where I could leave my corporate job at 35 years old and be home for the most important years of my daughter's formative lives. Amazing. And it's really been remarkable.
Fantastic. Jonathan.
And in contrast to Brad's story, who kind of like made relatively right moves objectively early on, I kind of followed what I would think of as the script that society hands you, which is to go get a degree and then get another degree, because everybody needs more education, and get that education at any cost, and go into these few fields that everybody knows pays really well. So I took that path because that's winning. And I graduated at the age of 24 years old with $168,000 in student loan debt. Sorry. I graduated at 28 years old with $168,000 in student loan debt. Yeah. I wish it was 24. That was 4 years back. And then I got my way back to broke over the next, 3 or 4 years. Because, and part of that getting back to broke was essentially me paying off that student loan debt, right? It sounds like a bad thing, but in reality, getting back to broke was great. And that's making progress over what the vast majority of people even do. And honestly, it was that force of nature need to pay off that student loan debt that made me feel like this idea, this concept of financial independence could still be a reality for me. And then there, kind of my entrepreneur story starts shortly after that. But what was so interesting about that is I felt like I was winning by following the playbook. And I realized looking back that I could have made a fraction of what I made, quote unquote, as an employee, as a pharmacist. But if I had been able to do that in the absence of student loan debt, if I had been able to start earlier, if I had focused more on some of the tenets that maybe we can talk about today, I could have gotten decades of my life back. And the great thing is, even though I didn't do it perfectly right, because I had this realization and actually took action on it, I mean, I am still going to get decades of my life back over what I would have if I had just continued down the normal path.
Absolutely right. Action is everything. So how did you guys meet, and what was the trigger for ChooseFI?
Yeah, so this was this kind of ties to my story of I need to pay down this debt. I mean, I realized instinctually that having $168,000 of student loan debt was not going to be a good thing for my future self. And so I was like a madman trying to pay this off, living on a very small fraction of what we were earning. And as I was getting closer and I was feeling more motivated, I started projecting, what am I going to do next? What is that next step going to be? And I started listening to a community of people who were talking about this concept called financial independence. This idea that you could get to the point where working is optional, not just your golden years, 65 and beyond, but you could really reclaim those best years, maybe your 30s, 40s, and 50s, depending on who was talking about it. And as I was listening and taking down this information and making note of the strategies that I would be implementing, I stumbled on this idea of travel rewards, which is a way that you could essentially take a line item in your budget that you were paying maybe thousands of dollars a year for. And that's applicable in my case because I have an international in-laws. We go visit my wife's family in Zimbabwe.
Wow.
Every year, every couple years. I mean, that's a $2,000 line item minimum. And so this was something I was definitely looking to optimize. And I heard Brad talking about this concept on another podcast.
Yeah, and this really ties into my own journey, which, as I said, I started a couple of websites and they were centered around using credit card rewards points to travel the world, if not for free, then pretty darn close. So yeah, Jonathan was sitting at home listening to a podcast that I was a guest on, very much like this. And he said, wow, this guy Brad lives in Richmond, Virginia. He's into financial independence and he's into travel rewards. I've got to get in touch with him.
Absolutely.
So
it wasn't much more complicated than that.
No, that was it. And that's the wild thing, right? Like, Pete, you never know where serendipity is going to hit. So Jonathan just shot me an email. Hey, let's grab lunch. And for whatever reason, I said yes. And
he still asks himself, why did I say yes? Same question.
Yeah, little did you know.
Right. Yeah, right. And yeah, the cool thing, Jonathan is a ball of energy and he had this idea for a website. And, it's interesting where life takes you. So I just randomly followed up with him a couple months later. I mean, he wasn't a friend of mine. It was just some guy I went to lunch with. But I shot him an email and said, hey, Jonathan, did you ever get started with that website? And he said that was basically the bolt of lightning that changed his entire life and ultimately changed my life and created this ChooseFI. He bought the website ChooseFI.com that very day to kind of prove that he did something.
And actually, I was trying to get credit for something I had done several days before and trying to take it. You ever done that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah,
Fantastic.
kind of the rest is history. We had this idea. Jonathan had an idea for a podcast and yeah, it just kind of came together.
But this is, if I could communicate one thing from this, what I want to get across is that the realization that Brad was talking about this and he lived in my area. And then when I messaged him, he said, yeah, let's go get lunch. Confirmed for me that these are real people that are doing this. Yeah. This isn't some fictitious figure on the internet. Wow, that was alliterative.
Yeah.
Let me write that down. This wasn't just a person on the internet who was making this stuff up. These are real people. And increasingly, as we increased our own zone of awareness and we met other people, we realized that there are a community, a tribe of individuals, and increasingly a larger tribe, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who have been quietly on this path, maybe just talking to each other, or maybe just doing this in a vacuum with no real way of communicating that information to a larger outside world. And that's a loss for all of us, because if we could encourage that conversation, if we can normalize this path, we all win. You can now talk about this. You don't need to feel like you're that frugal weirdo that's just doing something in a vacuum. You're making choices that other people aren't making. You realize that it can actually be normalized. And when we talk about, is this going mainstream? Is this spreading? That is a direct result of this smaller idea, which is I can talk about this with other individuals and I'm not crazy.
Absolutely right. Community is powerful. Before it feels to me like the whole FIRE movement is it's coming into its own. Certainly it feels like that here in the UK. It feels like we're at the beginning of it, right? But you guys, as ever, are a few years ahead. But before we hit that, can you, I've asked a couple of people this, I asked Barney White this, what would you define FI as meaning in as few words as possible if you were asked that?
Yeah, whenever someone says as few words as possible, I say, can you talk to Brad?
Yeah, right. You have a reputation, Jonathan.
Yeah, he really does. He lives up to it.
So many words.
Yeah, I mean, to me, financial independence is about freedom. As succinctly as possible, it's about freedom, where most of us live this hamster wheel existence of working 40, 50, 60-hour weeks to afford all the expensive things that we buy to make ourselves feel better, right? The fancy cars, the fancy houses or flats, whatever you want to call it. And we can't enjoy those because we're working all the time. Yeah, so for me, it's how do I reclaim my most precious resource, which is my time? And I can do that by saving money. So when you reframe saving money from, oh, that's the weirdo who wants to save money, or, oh, he or she, they're just depriving themselves, to no, I'm saving money to reclaim decades of my life, to spend it as I see fit. And that's the freedom, that's the autonomy that comes from saving money and getting to a point of financial independence.
That's powerful. So why then do you think now is the time that this is really just going crazy?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that have happened. So one, and we were talking about this just for a moment offline, and you use these words, it's become more of a worldview as opposed to just a simple equation. Okay. It's become a philosophy as opposed to just simple math. And that allows it to capture the imagination of a much broader audience who can see that, and this is not my words, I actually heard Pete, Mr. Money Mustache, say this. It's, at its essence, it's fundamentally right. There's not a single hole you can poke in it when you look at it from different sides. There's no downside to having more options in your life. And basically trading in maybe someone else's goals, someone else's idea of what the perfect life looks like for your own. And I think so many of us get caught up in financing stuff we can't afford, filling our homes and storage units and basements with stuff we don't need and don't have time to use. And then we get trapped in a lifestyle that keeps us working for those things. If you can take a step back, because you know that other people have taken a similar step back, and focus on what it is that you value, and then build a life that allows you to get more time doing that and less time on stuff that doesn't add value to your life, you're going to end up better off. There's no downside. I think the one straw man that, maybe hangs people up is like, is this about retirement? And I think increasingly the messaging, the community, what we've come to understand is that this is about options. This is about freedom. This is about financial independence, the ability to choose what your life looks like based on your values, not on someone else's, and certainly not on a mega marketing machine.
Right. And I think to your question, we're also living in uncertain times, as many people feel. So many of us, at least here in the US, our parents had safe jobs, maybe with pensions, and there were people retiring after 30 plus years at the same company with the gold watch as the retirement gift, and they'd ride off into the sunset. That doesn't really happen anymore.
It really doesn't.
There are...
The gold watch is plated. It's painted now.
Yeah.
But the uncertainty, right? We've lived through, just in the last decade or so, the financial crisis, the housing crisis. People lose jobs. There's student loan debts. And I don't mean to paint a negative picture, because that's not how I look at the world. I look at it as a very hopeful world, but there are these forces that people feel uncertain. And when you can save money, and when you can get to a point where you're not living paycheck to paycheck. So for so many people with $0 in the bank, if they lost their job, their entire lives crumble in 30, 60, or 90 days, right? I mean, could you imagine how stressful of an existence that is if your entire life crumbles in 3 months?
Yeah, terrifying.
That's right. We're talking about freedom and autonomy. If you save money, if you pursue financial independence, I don't care if you're at financial independence, that's irrelevant. Like, it's not a binary 0 or 1 to me. It's when you save money, as you accrue this power, it just keeps increasing along the way. So every step towards financial independence, the first $5,000 you have in the bank, $10,000. Can you imagine how much less stressful your life is when you have $10,000 in the bank?
It's a great step, isn't it? And I often say it's the first time. Just having a small, relatively sum of money in the bank is, for many people, the very first time that they feel in control. Suddenly they are in the driving seat and not just being blown about by whatever happens to them. And the power of just having that small-ish amount, maybe a big amount for them historically, but small in the grand scheme of things, is super powerful. There is, I think, a perception, and certainly I've heard it said, that you have to kind of live in a cave to achieve FI, right? You know, you have to sort of strip absolutely everything back, and it's a pretty sort of soulless, uninteresting existence. Now, I know you don't believe that, but I'd be interested to know what you would say to that sort of criticism.
Yeah, I think, if you kind of look at who has kind of carried the torch on these things over the past years, the messenger for these has kind of defined what this really means. And the great thing is, I think what we've seen, and maybe the reason that it's spreading so fast, is what we've truly seen over the last 3 or 4 years is the true democratization of information. Whereas maybe before you had 1 or 2 people who said, this is what it is. And for me, it's optimal living on $25K a year, $7K a year, whatever, pick a random number. This is what the perfect life looks like. Now what you have is thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people saying, I am so happy I made my choice, see what my life looks like. Because ultimately there is no dogma. There is no magical number that you need to live on. There is just action and inaction, right? There's you sitting, not doing anything, watching reruns on TV, versus you making choices to move your life and your family's life to a better place. That's kind of, if I could highlight that is amazing how many different messengers there are for this movement now. And it allows a diversity of opinion and life that we've just never seen before.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And to me, this is centered around value. As Jonathan said, there's no dogma. With ChooseFI, we don't have certain things that you have to check to be a card-carrying member of the FI movement. That's not the way it works. All that we ask is that you're intentional. That instead of
love that word. It's a favorite word here at Meaningful Money. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Instead of sleepwalking through life, as so many people do, really think about what you want your life to look like and what you value, right? So I don't care if you buy fancy things, if you're doing it from a place of intention. If you're just doing it because you want to impress your dopey friends next door, don't do it. That's a ridiculous reason. Absolutely. So, if you saw where Jonathan and I live, we live in a nice upper middle class, nice area of Richmond, both have nice houses, have 2 cars. Like, anybody from the outside would look at us as I say it, I'm rolling in abundance. Like, I feel like I live like a king. But what I've done is I've set up a framework of a life that just doesn't cost that much. So we drive old cars. I haven't had a car payment in 10 plus years because I don't value fancy cars. For many years, we actually just moved, but for many years we lived in a very, very inexpensive house. But again, we actually just moved because we value community. So we actually spent more money on our house. So that doesn't go towards the hermit living in a cave scenario, right? It's based on what you value. We don't spend that much money on food. So we've set up our 3 biggest expenses to just simply not cost that much. Yeah. And that enables you to have freedom to spend lavishly on what you do value.
That's exquisitely put, Brad. It's about focusing on what you value and then designing your life to meet that. I love that. I think sometimes there's a sort of counter argument, if you like, or a counter observation from the hermit in a cave thing, because you so often see on Instagram, you see, we paid off $900,000 of debt in 5 weeks, and people just go, that's completely, I'm exaggerating obviously, but it feels insurmountable for so many
Somebody
people.
has paid off 900,000.
Well, probably, I'm sure.
It wasn't me. But
Yeah, but do you know, there is, I think sometimes you think that's just completely unrealistic for me. Do you think that this is really something for folks on middle income, ordinary income, middle employees? They're not entrepreneurs necessarily. They're grinding, they're working hard. Is it possible for those folks?
Possible? Absolutely. Is it going to look the same? Probably not. Does that mean that you shouldn't pursue it? Absolutely not. Of course you should. Everybody should pursue a life where they have more options. I think if we tried to create one episode for everybody, it would be an abject failure. If we, you on Meaningful Money and us on ChooseFI continually grab people that have done it in different walks of life, different stages of life with different income levels, then we're doing a service to humanity. And to say, well, we are not going to talk about them because this isn't for them, that would be even worse, right? That would be a travesty. And what we found is we have found people that have done it at every income level. And this is, to me, what is so encouraging about this is to try and document what it looks like. So for instance, we had an individual that we just interviewed this past week. He had an income of $25,000, right? $25,000. And how did he's probably farther on the path to financial independence in his early 30s than I am, just based on some of the few decisions that he's made. So how does he do that? Because you can only frugalize so far, right? Sure. You can only cut so far. There is a baseline for what life costs, but it's probably not what you think it is if you're willing to be a little bit more creative. So for instance, with the example that Brad used, there's 3 things that make up the core of most people's expenses, which is really hard to imagine a life without: your transportation, your shelter, and your food. Those are 3 things that you need. But what if, and in this case, I'm going to do an iteration of what this person did just to illustrate how powerful that is. Those 3 things easily make up 50% of someone that's living on a low income budget. I mean, it absolutely does. So what if you could optimize your life around these variables? Is there a way that you could get a place close to where you work? First of all, that's good. And then you can cut down your transportation. It's actually shocking when you look and see what individuals on a low income, what percentage of their income goes to transportation in aggregate. It's really, really high. Is there a way that you could have a smarter decision there? A lot of people feel the need to get a new quote unquote safe car that they will have payments on forever, and then they'll upgrade to what if you could just reject that cycle and you could have a used 5 or 10-year-old car that you paid for in cash and you have no payments, and you're able to bring in an extra $200, $300, $400 a month where other people are making that payment, and assume that is a fact. Now, keep in mind that $200 or $300 or $400 a month on a low income is a massive percentage of their income that you've now chopped up just because you're willing to look at the problem differently. Let's say you scale that out and now you look at shelter. Everybody just assumes that you're going to pay to have a place to live. There are individuals, this person in particular, knew that they needed a home that was also an asset, an investment property. And for them, they brought in roommates into the home. They did a form of house hacking where they had like an extra room, or they had in this case, I think it was an extra unit that they rented out. So what they did is they just saved up a good down payment. So I think in their case, it was around maybe $8,000. They purchased this first one and they were basically living for free. Most people have baked in $700 to $1,000 a month for their living costs. This person said, no, I need a safe family home, but it also, because I don't have margin, I can't afford to screw this up. They also found a way to create an income stream. Now, between those 2 choices, you're bringing in an extra $1,000 to $1,500 a month, and you're doing this on a quote unquote low income. That's a massive percentage. You've effectively hit a 30 or 40% savings rate. And how much better is that person's life in a relatively short period of time, like 4 or 5 years? I mean, I just did the math on this the other day. If a person is able to save $1,000 a month because they made smart choices with their car and their housing, and they're able to do that for 5 years, and they make average market returns of I don't know, 8%. At the end of that 5-year period of time, they're going to have around $75,000. I mean, that, and by the time you get to $100,000, you're really starting to see the magic of compounding do its thing. Your life is going in a completely different direction. It's one choice, but you won't even know about it. You won't think about it if you don't see anybody else do it. Sure. You have to highlight the power of looking at the problem a little bit differently and realizing that there is somebody that has it worse than you have it. Wherever you are, whatever situation you find yourself in, there's somebody that had it worse than you had it and figured out a way to get around it. And what are you going to do with that information?
Yeah, fascinating. My next question was about where you are on both of your FI journeys. But I figure if I'm going to ask you that, I should be very clear about where I am on mine, right? FI is a relatively new concept to me. Now, I'm a financial planner. I'm a chartered financial planner. I've just given up my certified license, so I can't say that anymore. So I'm a chartered financial planner, which is the sort of pinnacle here in the UK. 21-year veteran in the industry. So, it's but my good friend Andy Hart, who is the founder of MeaningfulMoney and the MeaningfulMoney podcast, which is another big deal here in the UK, he stood up at a conference last year to advisors, financial professionals, and said, you need to take note of the FI movement because it will transform financial services into the future. And that was really the first time for me. I'd been sort of vaguely aware. I'd heard of Mr. Money Mustache and folks like that. But it was the first time that I sort of thought, well, where am I on this journey? Because I'm fairly sort of classically educating people about the finance system and how to navigate it, pensions and insurance, all that sort of stuff. But I started to think about where I am. Now, I own a company. I bought into it sort of 17 years ago, and a lot of my wealth is in this company, and I can't get that out, right, until I sell it, and I don't want to sell it. So I'm trying to get to this company to the point where it provides me an income without me actually working in it. Okay, and working that out. Meaningful Money is something I'm building to, and of course I'm saving into pensions and ISAs and all the stuff that we do here. So I'm not there by any stretch yet, but I'm on the journey. So I wonder, where you guys are at. Brad, I think you said that you'd nailed it by 35, but then Jonathan, also where you're at.
Yeah, so Brad's a much more boring answer. He's nailed it. He's good to go. Everything could fall apart. He never needs to earn another dollar again. He's good to go. He's doing this because he loves being here and
Congratulations, man. It's amazing.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And I mean, I think it's also important to know that I didn't get everything right from the time I was 22 years old.
He hates it when I say that he got everything right.
Yeah.
He hates
it. Because I certainly, and because it doesn't sound real, right? Like, and we talked before about stories. People relate to other human stories. And, me saying I did everything right, like, it's just
be
not
more
true.
Like me.
Right. No, yeah. You can't go back in time. Right. So, I mean, I've always been a natural saver. I think my wife and I got very fortunate. The woman that I married, I mean, she's probably more of a saver than I am.
Amazing.
And, from the very first. So we started off with a significant amount of net worth just by the time we were 25 when we got married. And I mean, but that said, we did some horrible real estate, what I thought was investing that was actually speculation. And it was a nightmare. I mean, honestly, Pete, like compounded, I probably lost hundreds of thousands of dollars, like legitimately hundreds, as opposed to what my net worth would be today. But the beautiful part about pursuing FI is when you have a 50% savings rate or higher, everything kind of works out as long as you're diligent about your savings, right? Like if you get, like we said before, if you get the big stuff right, you can either spend lavishly on things that you value, or in this case, well, I wish I didn't make that mistake, obviously, but I could make a mistake and I can still get over it, right? Sure. And pursuing this path has really been transformative for me, my wife, my kids. I mean, it's amazing that I get to spend this time with them. And I mean, those are years and decades that I could not have gotten back. So
as father of two daughters, my friend, it's the time goes extremely quickly. Mine has just had her end of school prom. So she's 16 and she's my youngest. Wow. And it's like, man alive, that's the end of an era. So it flies by. So fantastic. Yeah, Jonathan.
So anyway, that's kind of where I am on my journey.
Yeah, I was thinking about, as you were talking about, and I think this is actually part of the conversation, and I want to get this across, is that it's not binary. Mm-hmm. The power comes to your side of the court every single week, month paycheck that you make a decision to save your money, right? And I think the binary thing, it's really cool. This idea of financial independence. Wow, I get to the point where working is optional, and getting there is also awesome. But this isn't get rich quick, right? Get rich quick usually ends up with you a little bit better and your money in someone else's pocket after a seminar, and you've bought the VHS tapes and you're trying to find a player to go play them. But Brad uses this term. It is get rich over an intermediate time frame. It is get rich quick-ish. And it works every time because at its core, it is based on simple math.
Yeah.
So I think I'm probably like 30+% on to reaching my financial independence number. But along the way, I have created a lifestyle that like I don't want to walk away from. You couldn't pay me to walk away from it. It probably, and that's kind of one of the things I had the space, and it kind of goes to my story, which I it's a little bit of a sidebar, but I can tell you because I think it demonstrates the power of pursuing this long before you reach it. So in the pursuit of paying off all my debt, my wife and I had a very lean, frugal lifestyle. We were living for somewhere between $30,000 to $40,000 a year. We maintained that cost of living for the period of 4 years while we paid off our student loan debt. And after that, we continued that pretty aggressive 60+% savings rate, just basically for duration. And I started this project with Brad on the side, just as a side hustle. It was not a business. It was just a side hustle, something that we wanted to do together, really just to form community and continue the conversation. But it did. It started at some point to generate a small amount of income, and it became a thing. I maintained both my job as a pharmacist and the side hustle side by side. And increasingly what was happening was that this little podcast was taking off and taking up more and more of my time. And I was running them both side by side. And then 3 things happened. One, I mentioned my wife's family in Zimbabwe. We wanted to go visit them. We had a conference coming up, and then also a documentary wanted to come film with us. That's a lot. It was a lot going on. I remember feeling very stressed out about it. I went to my employer, my corporate employer, and I said, I see in our policies, we have an option here to give me an unpaid family leave of absence. I have a bunch of things going on. Can I take 3 weeks off unpaid? Everything's in good shape. I'll be able to come back afterwards. And my employer said to me, and I'll never forget, he said, I don't think it's in the company's best interest for us to let you do that. But because I had paid off my debt, because I had a small little business that was not replacing my income, but it was increasingly starting to look like it could replace my expenses, because I had several years of savings at this particular point in time. And because I knew what I valued, I was able to say to him, I don't think it's in my best interest to stay.
Fantastic.
Because you can always go back, right? You can always go back, but you can't do that if you've got 6 figures of student loan debt, if you've got a very high cost of living, if you've got all of these obligations, because I'm not an irresponsible person. I got to make sure I can always take care of my family. The pursuit of financial independence gave me the power when it came down to it, and I had to make a choice. I chose what I value, and I've never looked back.
Preach. Love it. Now, I mentioned right at the outset that ChooseFI has become a big deal. I mean, from my perspective on this side of the pond, I look over there and I think, okay, you've got Mr. Money Mustache, who is kind of the prime mover in it all, certainly the first mover advantage. And then you guys are right below that, from my perception. So, I mean, how are you doing it all? And, well, actually, first of all, I was very interested checking the site out about Camp FI. Can you tell me about that first? Because I'm super interested in that.
Yeah, so and actually both the answers tie together. It's about community. That's what we've hit on from the very first. With our podcast, with everything we've done, is Jonathan and I love talking into the microphone, and for whatever reason, people enjoy listening, but there's an extent to our knowledge, right? Like, we are not world-class experts at everything. But the beautiful thing is when you have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or more people in a community, you have world-class experts at everything. You have people who have figured out that one little life hack that just makes their life easier, and they want to scream from the rooftops and tell people about it.
Yeah.
Right. So while we have our little things that we feel like we've hit on, and it's fun to talk about, what I love getting is that voicemail or that email that says, hey, this is what I'm doing. Tell everybody about it. And when you get tens of thousands of those, you start, crowdsourcing, and it's like this rising tide lifts all boats scenario where we can all use our best practices, if you will, to make a better life. So everything drives off of community. And I think that is what we realized, again, from the very, very first, to make this, as we call it, a crowdsourced show. Nice. And ultimately a crowdsourced community. So one of the initial forays was creating a Facebook group. All right. So right now we have almost 50,000 people in that Facebook group, which it's mind blowing to us. And the cool thing is it's not sitting by idly. It's every Friday I post, what was the one action you took this week to make your life better in any aspect, money, finances, relationship, health, whatever it may be. Right. And we get hundreds, if not thousands of comments sometimes of people are getting off the couch, being intentional and taking action. So that then spread to ChooseFI local groups. So we have 200 plus ChooseFI local groups.
Amazing.
In real life meetups in, again, 200 plus cities around the world. When I went to London last summer to visit some of our family, we had a meetup with the ChooseFI London local group, and 100 plus people came out.
Fantastic.
And, the beautiful thing is they're not just one-off meetings, like let's go have a beer. It becomes part of the fabric of your community. And you rely on people. You can use sometimes the tenets of financial independence. Like a bunch of us here bought kind of like an appliance, or you could do like a lawnmower here. And instead of each of us buying a lawnmower that sits idly by 99% of the time.
You haven't seen my grass. Most it shoots up.
But
I just mowed.
But that's the cool thing. Like we actually did that with this mosquito sprayer. It's largely irrelevant. It's just a funny little anecdote. But like you can do that with local community that you maybe can't do with a 50,000 person Facebook group that's spread across the world. So drilling down into community and then in real life meetups. And that's kind of where ChooseFI sprung from. And that actually is not part of Stephen, who's the organizer, that we work with him hand in hand, but it is his baby. Okay. But the beautiful thing is he has, I think, 12 weekends now a year, something like that, 10 to 12 weekends a year. And he gets 70 people to show up, and it's just remarkable community event.
Yeah. And the key was really just, we know that as soon as you realize how awesome this can be, your next thing is, I need to find other people that are on this path and find out what they're doing in my local area and find out what they're doing in aggregate. And that's why we felt so compelled to support Stephen and support what he was doing with ChooseFI, because this was the realization of that vision. If you could have just a few days where people could get out of the meet and greet, go a little bit deeper, I mean, that is an incredible concept for sure. So
between you guys, for those watching on video, is a little blue book, which I believe is being launched in the next few weeks, months.
Yeah, it's going to go live in October.
Amazing.
And it is available for pre-order now. It's the link is at ChooseFI.com/book. What we did is we worked with Chris Mamula, who to write this book, and it essentially encapsulates the best thoughts and ideas from the first year of the interviews that we did. Now, we knew early on that there was a limitation to our own knowledge base, and the whole goal was to bring in as many experts in the different field as possible. The only problem with the way that we recorded them is that they will not be linear, because you just don't know what you don't know until after you know it. And then you say, oh, well, if I could go back, I would certainly organize it and structure it in a certain way. This book gives us an incredible ability to go back and say, how would I want to convey this to someone else that has never heard about this? And what order would I want them to hear the topics? And how would they build on each other? And what would be the format that would force an individual to take action on these ideas, where when you come away at the end, you have a blueprint for your own path to financial independence? Hence the name ChooseFI, your blueprint to financial independence. It is, I mean, I got to say, Chris wrote 90% of this based on the interviews that we done. We worked with him hand in hand to do it. But I'm so grateful and happy that he partnered with us on this, because I could not have, although we had a ton of words, right? So many words. This book, it is just perfect. I am so excited with how it came together and the content that it conveys to a new reader. It, just like the information, it will transform someone's life. And I think it can reach a whole new audience.
Absolutely. I'm excited for it, man. I will be pre-ordering it. I thought I'd done that last night, but I'm going to do it as soon as I get off this call. And I just checked, it's on Amazon.co.uk as well. So my listeners here in the UK can definitely pre-order that. That's going to be amazing. Now, apart from your own book then, you guys, before ChooseFI, when you started your own journey, will have been inspired or helped by some other resources. So, if you were to point people to those resources, what would they be?
Yeah, for me, the two biggest inflection points in my path to FI, like what woke me up. And again, it's always about what connects with you and your story. So I think podcasts are certainly helpful in that regard. And there are many of them. We love the Mad Scientist podcast, and Paula Pant's Afford Anything jump right off the page to me. But my first two resources were, as you mentioned, Mr. Money Mustache. There's a post called The Shockingly Simple Math Behind Early Retirement. Yeah. And that was just right. Like, that was an awakening moment for me. And the other one is Jim Collins has his stock series. He's at a website, jlcollinsnh.com. And he's also written the book, The Simple Path to Wealth. And that just made me realize that low-cost index fund investing was, for me at least, the way to move forward with this level of clarity that I didn't have previously. So investing always seemed very nebulous to me and frankly overwhelming, even though I was a certified public accountant here and I, theoretically should have had some knowledge of financial statements and such. It scared the heck out of me. And I think realizing that there maybe is a simpler path that over many, many decades is probably going to give you maybe the highest percentage chance of succeeding. That's a pretty good deal. So if you can go for simplicity and success, I'll take that. So yeah, that for me, those are the two, but I'd love to hear what Jonathan.
Yeah. I mean, I would echo his sentiments in particular with Pete and JL Collins. I think before that, though, two of my introductions, one, and it's actually not that surprising that we came from different directions because Brad wasn't dealing with 6 figures of student loan debt. But for me, when I was interested in paying off debt and I needed that motivation, Dave Ramsey,
yes,
well known here in the States, was someone that I found pretty quickly and was pretty, honestly, I think it's kind of informed a little bit of our show to this point. In particular, I love the motivation and the enthusiasm he brought to the conversation and really the intensity with which he advocated for his listeners to pay off debt. I hope that, kind of as we go into the future, what we're hoping to do is kind of build on that and say, debt-free isn't the end of the game. Frankly, that's just the beginning. I was getting back to broke. That's getting back to broke. What does it look like to move into the future? There's 2 other sources on top of the ones that Brad mentioned that I enjoyed. One was Rich Dad Poor Dad, which is kind of like a mixed offering when I suggest it to your listeners. It's certainly an amazing book when it comes to mindset and thinking about purchasing assets instead of stuff. I don't know if there's some questionable advice in there mixed within, but I found that very inspirational when I was listening to the audiobook version. And then White Coat Investors. So I was a pharmacist and ostensibly in a high income profession. And for me, looking at individuals in the medical field and how they were managing their finances, one of the things, if I were to extract out from that, one of the things that I appreciated was this was a guy that didn't have a degree in finance, and he was providing brilliantly accurate advice that was being dissected by his audience and exposed where it needed to be shored up. And it was just kept getting better and iterated over time. And I really appreciated the fact that, just like you can learn anything, like if I can go to school for 4/8 years to become a pharmacist, it is worth it for me to spend 20 hours total on financial knowledge that will result in potentially additional millions of dollars over my investing lifetime. Absolutely. It's probably worth it. And so, a combination of all the people that Brad mentioned, plus who I mentioned, I think informed some of my early mindset and thought processes on how I was going to be tackling this journey.
Fantastic. I've written all those down. I'll make sure there's links to those and obviously links to what you guys are doing. Where is the one place you would send people to find out more about what you're doing?
All right, I will I'll extend your courtesy and take 2 real quick. So episode 100 of ChooseFI. Obviously, if you're listening to this podcast, just subscribe to ChooseFI. Episode 100 is the place we start. And also choosefi.com/start. That's the easiest way to get on our email list, get a part of our Facebook group and our local groups, and to just learn more about really how to get started on this path.
Fantastic. Brad, Jonathan, this has been a delight. I feel a connection with you. You guys said some very kind things about Meaningful Money before we came online as well, and I just want to echo that back to you. It's clear that you are making a massive difference, and it's just great to watch from all the way over here. So please keep going. I know you will. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks for having us on.
Thanks again.
How cool was that? Love those guys. I love what they're doing. I love the way they communicate. I'm just in awe of what they've built really in a very short time. And deservedly so. Really got a lot of time for those guys. Definitely check out what they're up to, ChooseFI.com if you didn't pick that up already. And remember, obviously, notes and links are in the show notes for this episode, which is meaningfulmoney.tv/session335 or /ChooseFI, whichever is easier for you. So here's a review from Clark Nova, Clark Nova UK. Informative and entertaining, says Clark. I've started listening to Meaningful Money after getting bored of some of the other personal finance podcasts. and finding them to be a bit dry. Pete makes the subject entertaining. Don't know how. And has really motivated me to be more intentional with my finances. Love that word. I've even managed to get the good lady indoors on board with financial decisions. My work here is done. Thanks, Pete. Keep up all your great work. Clark Nova UK, thank you so much. All the best with your financial future. Definitely keep your good lady on board. She deserves that, okay? Look after her, right? Okay, if you like what you hear, we'll be getting into the new season in just a couple of weeks' time. I'm excited for that. We've been in a season sort of in between episodes, between season 14 and the upcoming season 15 of the show. But if you like what you're getting here, then do leave me a review, right? If you're on Apple Podcasts, then MeaningfulMoney.tv/iTunes is the place to go for that. But anywhere, to be honest, wherever you're listening to this, if you can leave me a review, please do so. It hugely helps and keeps me near the top of the rankings. Now, next week, I'm bringing back Tom Bakery, CEO and founder of LifeSearch, to talk about really the most underused and least understood area of personal finance, which is income protection. Now, I'm trailing this now. I did it a couple of weeks ago as well, but Tom was unwell, but he's making a good recovery. There is a chance that obviously it might not happen because I'm recording this a couple of weeks ahead, and maybe something will happen between now and when the interview is booked, which means he can't make it. But I'm hoping to bring you that interview. Fingers crossed, Tom. Get well soon, and look forward to chatting with you soon. But that's the plan for next week, all right? Watch this space. So if you've got any questions, if there's anything that you or anybody think about wanting to interview for a future in-between, so just get in touch. MeaningfulMoney.tv/askpete, okay? For questions and comments for today's show, particularly for Brad and Jonathan, then it's MeaningfulMoney.tv/session335 or MeaningfulMoney.tv/ChooseFI, whatever you prefer. But thanks again to Brad and Jonathan for joining me. Love talking to you guys. Wishing you all the success for the future. You richly deserve it. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next week.